All right, when you think about the story of David and Goliath, what do you think about? What's the first thing that you might think about? Smooth, flat river rocks. That's a good one. That's a good one. How many of you think about it being an underdog story, like little David and the great big giant? How many of you think about that? You get the picture of David running out there in the field and facing the big bold giant and taking him down. Well, tonight we're going to look at David and Goliath, but I'm going to give you maybe a different perspective on it. Maybe not. Maybe you've heard this. Maybe you haven't. But I believe that the story of David and Goliath is one of those stories that's kind of a timeless story. Every Bible school in the world's ever taught about it. Every VBS has probably talked about it sometime. Every preacher's probably preached on it 3,000 or 4,000 times in their life. There's so much information there that you can preach on. But I want to preach and talk to you tonight about a pattern that we can see in David and Goliath that can just carry over into almost everything that we do in our own lives. There's a pattern here that I believe if you'll look at, that it will give you some insight of some of the things that you're going through in your life that will make you pause just a minute and say, okay, this is what's happening. This is what's going on in my life right now. Because a lot of times, things that happen in our life are just a simple matter of perspective. You know people that are going through things and they look at their life and they just see all the bad and negative stuff in their life, but you're standing on the outside looking and like, wow, look at all the great things they have going on in their life. Look at the things that they're not seeing. Or maybe there's somebody's just got a perspective about life in general, something they're going through, a situation that they're going through, and they might be like, well, this is just horrible. But then you can give them a story or talk to them about it, and they can give them a perspective of something else, and it makes that things not seem so bad or so difficult. And I think, again, like I said, when you look at David and Goliath, there is a pattern here that we can pattern in our own life, to, like I said, to give us some perspective about the things that are going on in our life. So if you have your Bibles or notes or whatever, you can open up to 1 Samuel 17. And again, this is one of those stories. I'm not going to read all of it. We're just going to kind of skip around in it. But 1 Samuel 17:1 says, let me get out of the Message version. We do not want to read that here. All right. It says, now the Philistines gathered their armies for battle, and they gathered at Socoh, which belongs to Judah, and they camped between Socoh and Azekah in Ephes Damim. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered and camped in the valley of Elah, and drew up in battle array to encounter the Philistines. So the first thing that you're going to see here, if you go back a couple chapters, you're going to see, and even past chapters through this, the Philistines are one of these groups that just keeps showing up all the time, and they just want to fight all the time. That when you're reading through the Bible, you see the Philistines show up a lot. But Saul, in a couple chapters before, has a battle, and he draws people in, and when the numbers that I can count, there's no specific number, but the numbers that you can count a couple chapters behind, the army of Israel is about 40,000 men. Okay? There's about 40,000 men that Saul has with him in this valley of Elah. And here are the Philistines on the other side. And everybody's mounted up. Everybody's standing at arms. Everybody's ready. And now they're looking at each other. Something's going to happen. They're just kind of sizing each other up, kind of looking at each other, and we're getting ready to have a battle of some sort. So, what I want you to see here, and what you'll see in the first few verses of this chapter is, listen, life happens, and life is full of conflict. There are conflicts that show up almost every single day of our life. Now, for most of us, when we think of the word conflict, we think of some big internal thing happening, some big battle that's getting ready to happen, some big blow up, some big argument that's going to happen. But seriously, a conflict is just a point where a decision has to be made. Something has to happen at that moment. When you go to the grocery store and you load your buggy up full of groceries and you go up to the counter and the cashier rings your groceries up, and at that moment you look over and she says, all right, you owe $125 for your groceries. That's a moment of conflict. Are you going to pay or not going to pay? What am I going to do? Am I going to eat this week? I'm not going to eat this week. There's a moment of conflict. And it doesn't seem to be that big. I mean, if you're planning on spending that money, planning on going to the grocery store, that doesn't seem like a big idea. But it's a moment of conflict. We're pointed out in conflict all the time. It says the Philistines stood on the mountain on one side while Israel stood on the mountain on the other side, with the valley between them. And then a champion came out of the armies of the Philistines named Goliath from Gath. And his height was 6 cubits and a span. And he had a bronze helmet on his head. And he was clothed with scale armor, which weighed 5,000 shekels of bronze. And he also had bronze greaves on his legs and a bronze javelin slung between his shoulders. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and the head of his spear weighed 600 shekels of iron. His shield carrier also walked before him. He stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel and said to them, "Why do you come out to draw up in battle army? Am I not the Philistine, and you the servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves and let him come down to me. And if he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will become your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall become our servants and serve us." And again the Philistine said, "I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together." And when Saul and Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. So the first thing, again, the first thing we're going to talk about is conflict. So the reason I say this as a pattern is because if you realize real quick, there is something that happens in almost, if you can go through the Bible and start working through Bible stories, there's always a point of tension, a point of conflict that's going to come up. This has been going on since the beginning. It's been happening since the beginning. Go back into Genesis chapter 3 when the serpent shows up into the garden. And he starts talking to Adam and Eve, and he starts putting at them this point of conflict, like, well, why don't you eat from this tree? And Adam and Eve's like, well, we can't eat from this tree. If we eat from this tree, we'll surely die. and the serpent is like, well, no, you'll not die. God didn't want you to eat from that tree, because when you eat from that tree, your eyes are going to be open and you're going to feel like you're going to be like one of the gods. You're going to be just like him. And there's this point of conflict. Here it is. What are we going to do? This point of temptation, this point of choice. What are we going to do? Again, Samuel 17, this is an exact example. Here is Saul. He's standing in front of the armies of Israel. He's standing there with his Philistine army behind him. And he's like, here I am. You bring one of your guys out. And if he kills me, then we'll be your servants. And if I kill them, we'll be your servants. Or you'll be our servants. A point of tension. A point of something happening. Matthew chapter 4, Luke chapter 4, when Jesus is tempted in the desert for the 40 days and the 40 nights. Here's the enemy standing in front of Jesus saying, listen, if you'll do this, take this bread and eat it if you're hungry. If you'll just take this right here, I'll give you all the kingdoms of the world. This point of tension, something has to happen. There's a point of conflict. 40,000 people standing on the side of Israel. Untold number standing on side of the Philistines. One description in the stories before this story in Samuel talks about that the number of the armies of the Philistines was more than the sand they could count. So I'm just going to say that there was more of them than there was of the Israelites. Just from, simple guessing. I don't know exactly how many were there. And from what I understand of history, these armies would come across. Now they were on two sides of a valley. And from what I understand, the valley of Elah it was a very steep valley. It wasn't something that you would just kind of walk down and walk up. So if you decided to charge on one another, you would have to come up the hill to get the other side. And so the guys on top would always have the advantage. So here's those armies on the sides of the valley, and they're looking at each other. And it was not in custom that one would send one guy out, one would send another guy out to try to limit the damage that was going to be done. Send your strongest man out to battle. So this wasn't something that was uncommon in history. But here was Goliath. Bigger than any man in his army. Bigger than any man on the side of Israel. He's got his war garment on, the bronze helmet, the bronze shield, the bronze shekels on his arms, the bronze shekels on his legs. He's got this spear. When you look at this, you can go online and look up GoliathSpear.com, I think of it. There's a guy that recreated spear based on the numbers that are given here. This thing is huge. It's huge. It's probably 12 foot tall. The end of it weighed like 30 pounds. It was huge. So here he's standing down and he's screaming. I don't know how many giants you've ever seen. How many of growing up in the 70s and 80s remember Andre the Giant? Do you remember Andre the Giant that's on TV that wrestled and all this other stuff? There's not too many giants that I've ever heard that had a real high-pitched voice. None that I've ever heard, honestly. So you can imagine here's Goliath standing out in this valley with the echo, and he's got this booming voice, and he's screaming at the Israelites, "Come on, send someone out here. Let's have a battle." So that we're at this point of conflict. And what does Israel do? Israel sees him, and they just run. They just hide themselves. We're not going out there at all. They were greatly afraid. It says, "Now David was the son of Ephraim of Bethlehem in Judah, whose name was Jesse, and he had 8 sons. And Jesse was old in the days of Saul, advanced in years among the men. And the 3 older sons of Jesse had gone after Saul to battle, and the name of his 3 sons who went to the battle were Eliab, the firstborn, the second of them Abinadab, and the third Shammah. And David was the youngest. And now the 3 oldest followed Saul, but David went back and forth from Saul to tend his father's flock at Bethlehem. And the Philistine came forward morning and evening for 40 days and took his stand." So 80 times, twice a day for 40 days, Goliath was coming out there and challenging the Israelites. Let's do something. Let's do something. Send your guy out. I'm here. Let's do something. And then Jesse said to David his son, "Take for you now, your brothers, an ephah of this roasted grain and these 10 loaves, and run to the camp to your brothers." So Jesse sends David out to take lunch. He's running back and forth anyway. If you go back in a few chapters of Samuel, you'll see where David is anointed king, or the next king of Israel. He's also chosen by Saul to come in and play the harp. So this is not somebody Saul is completely unfamiliar with. And David is spending time going back and forth between being a shepherd and coming in and doing these things for Saul. So he's just back and forth in this time. And so on one of his trips back in, his dad's like, "Here, take your brother something to eat." So David arose early in the morning and left the flock with the keeper and took the supplies and went as Jesse commanded him. And he came to the circle of the camp while the army was going out in battle array, shouting the war cry. Israel and the Philistines drew up in battle array, army against army. And then David left his baggage in the care of the baggage keeper and ran to the battle line, entered in order to greet his brother. And as he was talking to them, behold, the champion, the Philistine, formed from Gath, named Goliath, was coming up from the army of the Philistines, and he spoke these words, and David heard them. When all the men of Israel saw the man, they fled from him and were greatly afraid. And the men of Israel said, "Have you seen this man who is coming up? Surely he is coming up to defy Israel. And it will be that the king will enrich the man who kills him with great riches and give him his daughter and make his father's house free in Israel." So here we are. We're at this point of conflict. David has come onto the line. He sees every day. Here's Israel every day walking out to the battle line. I'm not sure what they're doing, but they're lining up, and every day, twice a day, here comes Goliath out to scream and holler at them and challenge them to a fight. And every time, twice a day, Israel's running and tucking tail. They're running and hiding. And so David shows up, and everybody's lined up for battle like we're getting ready to do something, and he runs into trying to find his brothers, and all of a sudden here comes Goliath, and they're taking tail and run. And David just kind of follows them back in like, what's happening? What's happening? And they tell him, here's what's going on. That whoever kills this guy, the king will you'll receive riches, you'll get to marry his daughter, and your father's house will be free from taxes forever. And so David just questions again, You know, say that again. What will happen if we do this? And they repeat it to him. And David was like, I'm the man. If I'm going to get all this, let's just show up to the battle. So skip down just a little bit. So when David got done talking to his brothers, it says, when the words which David spoke were heard, they told him to Saul, and he said, and he sent for him. And David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail on account of him. Your servant will go and fight with the Philistines. So here's David like, I'm going to sign up. I'm going to sign up. And then Saul said to David, you're not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, but you are but a youth, while he has been a warrior from his youth. But David said to Saul, your servant was tending his father's sheep when a lion or a bear came and took a lamb from the flock. I went out after him and attacked him and rescued it from his mouth, and then he rose up against me. And I seized him by his beard and struck him and killed him. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, since he has taunted the armies of the living God. And David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said to David, go, and may the Lord be with you. And then Saul clothed David with his garments and put a bronze helmet on his head and clothed him with armor. And David girded his sword over his armor and tried to walk, for he had not tested them. And so David said to Saul, I cannot go with these, for I have not tested them. And David took them off, and he took his stick in his hand, or sling in his hand, and chose for himself 5 smooth stones from the brook, and put them in the shepherd's bag, which he had even in his pouch, and his sling was in his hand. And he approached the Philistine. And then the Philistine came and approached David, and with the shield bearer in front of him. And when the Philistine looked at and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth and ruddy and with a handsome appearance. And then the Philistine said to David, am I a dog that you come at me with a sling and a stick? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. And the Philistine also said to David, come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the sky and the beasts of the field. And then David said to the Philistine, you come to me with a sword, a spear, and a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of the host and the God of the armies who you have taunted. And this day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I will strike you down and remove your head from you. And I will give the dead bodies of the army of the Philistines this day to the birds of the sky and the wild beasts of the earth, and all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. Point of conflict here. 40,000 men standing on one side. Untold number on the other side. Goliath running out twice a day screaming at them. David shows up. Everybody's running away. Like, what's going on? What's going on? They tell him the story, and he's like, that's it. I'm in. Let me go. Let me go do this. And so he's telling his brothers this, and they're like, well, you need to go see the king. And they go tell the king, and the king's like, well, bring him here. And so he goes in and talks to the king, and the king's like, you can't do this. You're just a youth. And this guy's been fighting since he was a youth. You can't run out here and do this. And he's like, I'm going to do it. As soon as, he goes through his whole resume of what he's done with the lion and the bear and protecting the sheep and all this other times. And then he says, God protected me in this, and he'll deliver me from this as well. So what we're going to see next is combat. There's a repeated pattern in this book that you keep reading over and over and over and every day. You see a conflict. Every one of us has conflict that shows up in our life. But there also comes a time for combat. Now here's the thing, guys. Nothing in your life is ever going to change unless you show up. Unless you show up. What I want you to see is that the combat has to be done when someone decides to stand up and fight. There's only one time in the Bible that the Lord says, hey, go out here and do this. Don't worry, the battle's mine. But even in that story, the guys had to show up. They had to send out and do exactly what the Lord told them to do. We have to be present in our battles. You go back and read 1 Samuel. Go back and read all the way up to where David is anointed king. There is no prophecy, there is nothing in this book that says that David has to be the one to kill Goliath. Nowhere. There is nowhere in that book that says David is the one. But yet, 40,000 men of Israel, 40,000 children of God, standing out there, and nobody's willing to do anything. God's told them to keep moving forward. God's told them to do the things. A giant shows up. They back up. We can't go there. Very reminiscent of in Numbers 13 when the children of Israel, the spies went in to look at the land that had been promised, and they come back and what they say? We can't go. There's giants there. And unto them we look like grasshoppers. They ran from the promise. They ran from the conflict. They ran from the battle. If we want to see things change, if we want to see things happen, then we have to be willing to go from conflict to combat. We have to be willing to be present. 40,000 people. 40,000. Now, just take this number and I want you to plant it in the back of your head and keep it. One. It took one person. It took one person to change this story. One person. 40,000 people over here. Any of them could have chose to do whatever. None of them did. But one guy showed up and said, let's do this. Let's make it happen. One person. That's how important you are. That's how important everyone is. It doesn't take but one person to change the world. One person. If we will stand up and face our conflicts, one person is all it takes. Now here's the other side of this story. 40,000 Israelites on this side, one person. The entire army of the Philistines, and one person. Why do you think? This is always what's baffled me. It's always what baffled me. And I feel like the Lord enlightened me a little bit on this. This is what just completely baffled me. Why in the world? Listen, I get bored sitting at my house for an hour. An hour. My children get bored sitting at my house in like 15 minutes. They don't want to do, like if they have to sit down for like 15 minutes, it's like you've killed them. Like, oh, and they get to shaking and moving around. They get the twitchy feet and they can't sit still. It's the way children are. 40 days. The army is camped in one spot for 40 days. They've run out here, and they run back. They run out here, and they run back. 40 days. That's forever. That is a crazy amount of time. And for 40 days, here comes Goliath running out, screaming at them and hollering at them, telling them to send somebody out. Why didn't anybody do anything? I mean, how many of you have ever been in like in a school fight? When you were growing up in a school fight and there are people standing around and just kind of jawing at each other. And then all of a sudden there's somebody back there, the instigator. And it's the instigator like, you ain't going to take that, are you? You ain't going to let him say that about your mama, are you? Whatever. And that's how the fight starts, because somebody instigated. It ain't really because the two people want to do anything. It's because somebody else feel like they're challenging somebody's manhood right there. Like, you ain't going to let him do that to you, are you? Some of the craziest things I've ever seen done that way. There's always that one, the instigator. 40 days, this guy's running out, and there ain't one soul sitting out there going, hey, somebody take care of him, or, you ain't going to let him talk to you. Nothing. There's nothing happen. 40 days. It's forever. But I want you to get this picture. Did Goliath want anybody to come across that hill? My belief is no. My belief is that Goliath and the Philistines would have stayed there forever if nobody would have ever came out. And the picture that I want you to see is I think that our enemy Satan is the exact same way. He wants to stand at that hill and he wants to holler at you and tell you how useless, how no good you are. How you couldn't come out here and whip yourself out of a wet paper bag if you wanted to. And wants to come out here and talk all about all your past and everything else that's going on in life and how you'll never measure up and how you'll never be good enough and all these things that are going on. But the last thing he wants you to do is to stand up. He don't want you to show up. He don't want you to act on it. Because he's already defeated. There really is no fight to be had. Just like the last time we talked about those shadows, it's just a voice that's screaming at you, that tells you that you'll just never measure up. You'll just never be good enough. You don't have any right to do anything. You're pitiful. You're junk. You're terrible. The world hates you. And he just stands and screams at you. And for most of us, and for most of the body of Christ, we wake up in the morning and we hear that voice, or we have someone else say something to us, and we run just like the Israelites did. And then the next day we get right back up, and we walk back up there, and that same conflict meets us in the face, and that same thing hollers at us, and we just turn right back around and we run around. Day after day after day after day, same thing over and over and over again. And you think 40 days is a long time? There's people who have been doing this for 40 years. Walking out in their life and living a defeated life as a Christian. These are children of God. Again, there was no special thing on David that said that David had to be the one to face the giant. It just so happens that he did. But they were all part of God's elect. But they just kept running out and running back away. There's nothing special about any of us in here if we're children of God. We're all children of God. We all have that authority to speak to the enemy. James 4:7 says, submit yourself unto God and resist the devil, and he will flee. 1 Peter 5:8 says that the devil's just walking around like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. He's walking around like a roaring lion. He has no teeth. He can't bite you. All he can do is holler and scream at you and try to distract you with something that's not really true. 2 Corinthians 10:1-5 says, now I, Paul, making a personal appeal to you, by the gentleness and the graciousness of Christ. I who am humble among you in person, but bold towards you when absent. I beg that when I am present, I will not need to be bold with confidence, by which I plan to challenge certain people who think that we are behaving in an unspiritual way. For though we live in this body, we do not wage in an unspiritual way, since the weapons of our warfare are not worldly, but are powerful through God for the demolition of strongholds. We demolish arguments and every high-minded thing that is raised up against the knowledge of God, taking every thought captive to obey Christ. Listen, the battle that we are fighting is the battle here. It's the battle that he's after. It's the thing that if the devil can talk to you, the enemy can talk to you and build a stronghold in your mind that tells you that I can't do something else, that this thing is bigger than God, this thing is bigger than you, you are not worthy, then it will keep us down and it will keep us running. But it says that we will demolish, that we are powerful through God for that demolish strongholds, and that we demolish arguments and every high-minded thing that rises itself up against the knowledge of God, taking all those thoughts captive to obey Christ. Those things that tell you are not good enough, those are the things we have to face. We have to face and be ready to stand up and just reject them. God said that we are more than conquerors. He says that we are the righteousness of God in Him. We are worthy because of what He did for us on the cross. We don't have to hide in shame and fear anymore. He told us in Hebrews to come boldly to the throne room of grace. We have to be willing to combat what's going on. And then finally, once we're willing to stand up, then we get to do this awesome thing. We get to invoke our covenant, our promise. We're not going into this battle. That's the awesome thing is yes, we can stand up. Yes, we can change it. But now, when we stand up to face the conflict, when we say to ourselves, we're putting on the full armor of God and we're going into battle, guess what? God's going in with you. God's going in with you. David said that I will invoke the name of the Lord upon Goliath. And he went into that battle full of faith that his Lord will deliver him. It's that covenant. Matthew 4 and Luke 4 again, when Jesus was tempted, when he was brought forth with conflict, how did he fight that conflict? It is written. 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 Over and over and over again. 2 Peter 1, 2 through 4 says, may God give you more and more grace as peace as you grow in your knowledge of God and Jesus our Lord. By His divine power, God has given us everything we need for living a godly life. We have received all of this by coming to know Him. So the more we know His Word, the more we know Him. The one who has called us to Himself by means of His marvelous and glorious excellence. And because of His glory and excellence, He has given us the great and precious promises. And these are the promises that enable us to share His divine nature and to escape the world's corruption caused by human desires. It's through His promises. It's through His Word. It's through that foundation that we're going to stand and fight these battles. And through those battles, He comes with us and we can invoke that covenant. Those promises that are guaranteed to us by God. And there's nothing and no enemy or anything else that can take that away from it. It says, what can separate us from the love of Christ? And it goes through that whole list. And if you read that whole list, it's basically everything. There's nothing that can separate us from what God has set for us, but us. Psalms 103, 1 through 5 says, bless the Lord, O my soul. Here's David writing. And he says, all that is within me, bless His holy name. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all of His covenant benefits. Who forgives all your iniquities, who heals all your diseases, who redeems your life from destruction, who crowns you with loving kindness and tender mercies, who satisfies your mouth with good things so that your youth is renewed like the eagles. That covenant is what we live under. That covenant promise, all the benefits that come with that. If we will stand up and face our conflicts, listen, it's not easy. It's not easy. And the reason it is not easy is because the world is screaming around you that this is just a lie. This is just a fallacy. Do you not know where you came from? And they're going to tell you over and over and over again, you will never rise above your circumstances. You're never going to be good enough. You're never going to be those things. But we have to be willing to reject it. We have to be willing to walk in His promises. We have to be willing to stand up in the face of the giant while everybody else runs away. We have to be willing to be the one. Here's the awesome thing, guys. Here's the awesome thing is, it's not a sacrifice. It's not a sacrifice anymore. The sacrifice has been paid. The price has been paid. We've been bought. We've been redeemed. We have the right. All we're doing now is showing up to receive the promises that He's promised to us. It's already there. We just have to stand up and receive them. What does that look like on a daily basis? When you wake up in the morning and the world tells you that you're not going to do it, maybe you've lost your job recently. Maybe you're under some kind of circumstances at work going on. Maybe something's happening and the world is screaming that it's just over. It's time for you to stand up. By the Lord of hosts, I've been delivered before and I'll be delivered again. Every time. I'm going to be delivered again. And as long as there's a breath on my life, I win. I win. That's what it's about. Standing up. When I read this, and I've read this, like I said, I've read this a million times. You've probably heard me teach out of this before. I've taught several things out of this. I read this over and over and over again, and I see this more and more and more. That one person can change the world. And that we have the right to change the world. It's already been bought and paid for right here. So as we go into this week, as we go forward, listen guys, we can change it. We can grow. We can bust out of the seams in this building. We can. And there's nothing special about what we have to do. Nothing. We just have to be willing to stand up and meet that conflict head on. There's going to be people that show up to this building that are carrying the load of the world on their back. And they feel like they've had to fight it all by themselves. And the enemy and the world is just putting more and more pressure on them. But this building, this parking lot, this presence as they come in here, we can be that person that they can walk behind. That as the enemy comes to us, the enemy will flee. And that weight can feel like it's been pulled off of them. And people that are hurting, that have been defeated, that have been broken, can honest to goodness feel for the first time in years the love of God on their life. I know Cliff talks about it all the time, but some of you may not realize we go to church as a rote habit sometimes, and we're here as a rote thing, and we just do it. We just do it. We just do it. We show up on Sunday, and it's just a thing that we do on Sunday. What do you do on Sunday? We go to church on Sunday. So you go to church, you go sit in your pew, you go fill up, and you just sometimes you just walk through it. I've done it before. But if you will think when you walk in this door that you can make a difference. You can make a difference just sitting in a pew when somebody comes in the door just by shaking their hand. Just for giving them a hug. Just for praying for them. We can change the world. We can change the world. Let's stand.